I'm all set up. I just have to click advance, right? To the next slide.
Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Yes, I can see everyone's coming on the line. Excellent. Happy Friday. Welcome to Session 9, Urban Landscaping. My name is Caitlin, and I will be your session moderator. I'm also the owner of a very small and unfortunately very sad native prairie pollinator garden. So I'm personally very excited about this amazing lineup of speakers we have today. I'd like to start by stating we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I would like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. Just a reminder to everyone that this presentation is being recorded. I'd like to note that question and answer logs from past sessions are also now available. So if you just click on sessions and click on the one, and you might be able to find the answer to your question there. I'd also like to introduce our first presenter, Gail Fennell with Nature Regina, and Gail will be speaking about accidental landscaping, finding a place for grassland species in an urban setting. So with that, we will turn it over to you, Gail.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm really excited about the possibilities there are for finding places for pollinators in our own gardens. There's 5 things that I'm hoping that you'll be able to use when you leave, things about native plants and pollinators living in cities. There is definitely enough room in the city for us to find places for the pollinators. And then where to look for the places and ensuring that the pollinators have enough forage, plants and nesting places, and that you find a way to enjoy finding out about these pop-up plant surprises. Like the fun is definitely something that's all part of it. And planting for the pollinators could be simpler than you think. The plants and the pollinators are definitely very smart about living in the city here. I call it accidental landscaping. It's actually the plants themselves that I'm calling the accidental landscapers, popping up wherever it suits them. And I've come to know every day I find out a little bit more about just how smart the plants and the insects are about figuring out how to live among the humans in an environment that is actually even more harsh than the ones that they've always lived in. Definitely not what they were prepared for before we came along. There's 2 books that have helped me along the way to understand better what's going on. This one by Thomas Rainer and Claudia West. From this book, I found out about planting in communities of plants, and including the insects and the animals and the people that are going to be using the communities when I'm trying to plan what to put where. In the photo is a community of people. It's myself, our neighbors, and some other people as the city departments, and our volunteer groups, our community associations all came together to increase the biodiversity at this stormwater pond that was in our neighborhood. And the other thing that I got from the Thomas Rainer book was about keeping the existing habitat and choosing the plants that like that habitat as a better way to go in terms of what the plants and the pollinators and the other wildlife need. The second book was one I just found last year, quite by accident at the library, called Nature's Best Hope by Douglas Ptolemy. And what I got from his book that really helped me, because I live on a very small lot, only 25-foot lot, and I'm thinking, how on earth can I make any difference at all? But in this book, he shows how collectively together, we can all work together and we can actually create a very large space for the native plants and the other wildlife that used to live here before there was a city. The other thing I learned was about how the insects and the animals living in the city are as urban as us. They have different survival skills than the insects and plants that are living outside the city in their native prairie. And he showed us how just small, simple changes in our own yard means that our cities can definitely become better places for grassland species. Why focus on the grasslands? Well, the rainforests and the oceans, marines, they've got many champions. Compared to the total North American population, though, there's not very many people living on the prairies to tell everybody else about the changes that we're seeing. There's just a few of us. And it really doesn't help that a lot of people living in cities away from the prairies think that a prairie is a waving field of wheat. And we definitely need the wheat, I'm not saying that, but it's definitely not a native prairie. So they don't quite understand what it is we're talking about. So, what we can do is amplify the voices of the grasslands champions, because they're out there, but they need louder voices. They need help getting the message out to people who don't live on the prairies. We can grow a patch of grassland plants in our own yard, and we can share those seeds and some of the plants with our friends and get them going so that we can have more diversity within our cities. I'll be talking a little bit about actually reimagining our urban spaces for the pollinators. Is there planned landscaping? Is it accidental landscaping that's happening? What do the accidental pop-ups show us? And a little bit about native plants, nativars and cultivars, and some of the ecological benefits of native plants. I'll mention those along the way. Definitely, when you're working in a city, there's landscaping constraints. We have bylaws, we've got architectural controls, local climate and weather, budget, space, plant availability. Our own plant knowledge will make a difference, and definitely our physical abilities will affect how much landscaping we want to do. Traditional landscaping has got one way of looking at things. We change the amount of water available, amend the soil, really control the pests and take control of what might want to eat our plants all ourselves. But the main focus is on a human using that space. And lately there's a little bit more focus on food for the pollinators and the birds. So that's a good direction to start moving in. Here's some very familiar landscaping. Public parks, there's one park, the one on the bottom is in Edmonton, near where I used to live there. The one on the top left is in Regina, and the one on the top right is actually in North Dakota. And what's similar about them is the types of turf that were used to build them, even the types of shrubs are quite similar, but they're 1,000 kilometers apart. So there is not a lot of plants that are specific to those areas. That's not been thought of as much before. And we do the same thing with our houses. The one house is in Edmonton on the left, the one on the bottom right is in Regina. On the top right is in Carl Junction, Missouri. So there's 2,800 kilometers between them, and yet they've all got Kentucky bluegrass turf and Asiatic lilies, and even the shrubs are similar in the neighborhood, if not in the yard. So accidental landscaping, is it moving the snow around? Is it, well, it could be described that if that's reshaping our landscape. But if we're only landscaping for the summer, which is generally what urban people are thinking of, there's 8 months of the year and 4 of it under snow in a lot of places. We're not even thinking about the landscaping in terms of how it could benefit the native plants and the pollinators. And I'm pretty sure if we did, we would start seeing places to put that snow besides just pushing it over to the side of the road. We could make better use of it. So another example of accidental landscaping, I bet there is absolutely nobody that said, let's landscape for the geese. And yet when we landscape for ourselves, we accidentally made the perfect setting for the geese to come and have many, many babies because there's a huge banquet for them. So not quite what we wanted. Here's a couple more examples. These are pop-ups. These are all native plants that pop up around Regina. The two on the left are in a sidewalk. We definitely don't want them growing there, but they show us the type of environment they could live in, quite a harsh one. So we can find places in the city where those plants could take care of themselves and we'd be happy to have them. The one on the right is in a xeriscaped area. So we're not allowed to have any plants. By the design, we're not allowed to have any plants. I found painted ladies on those sunflowers when I took that photo, but 2 weeks later, all the plants were gone from along there. The plants were not in the path. They were not in that, and it's a parking lot on the other side. So it really is an aesthetics reason for taking out all the plants. They are showing us right there that they are quite happy to grow. And once you start looking for the prairie plants around the city, they are absolutely everywhere that you can imagine. So we could reimagine our public spaces for the pollinators. We could use corporately controlled land. In this case, this is a utility company owns 10 acres of urban native prairie. We can use civically owned land. We've got other public spaces like this garden it's the Nature Regina garden, native plant garden at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, but we can still increase more and different types of plants that we put in there. There's entrances to the park subdivisions is another place that we can easily put more native plants in. Another example of public parks, they don't have to look much different. We can use the specimen plantings in a similar way where it's appropriate. If we use signs to tell people what's going on, then there'll be much more acceptance of it. So we can use the green space we've already got, and we can use a little bit more of our private space to help out the pollinators. This is in Omaha, Nebraska, downtown. They're they're redoing their downtown. And along the way, they wanted to use the native plants to help the pollinators. Like that's an active thing in that city. I think it was about 100 degrees on the day that I was there. It was at least 95. It was very hot. So the native plants there, like here's a real ecological benefit for using the native plants in this type of thing. Reduce water usage, permeable surface to reduce runoff and flooding, and because just over the surface movement of water towards the waterways, and because there's a reduced movement of the water, there's a reduced movement of the chemicals coming off the roads too. Cooler ground temperatures from reduced asphalt and cement. There's lots of forage and nesting area in there for the pollinators, and there's forage for birds because they do use a lot of grass in their plantings there. They've made it look neat and tidy for the public, which is an aesthetic that a lot of people like, by putting pathways around. So even though that the plants are not as compact as you would normally use in a public setting, they still look great. And so using the native plants, another ecological benefit is that there's a reduced resources needed to grow, transport, store, install, and keep reinstalling the plants that really aren't suited to be in that harsh environment. And another benefit is we get to enjoy a very pleasant area, which reduces our stress too. This is an example of a back alley. A friend Edmonton wanted to do a little bit more than have just turf that needed to be grown, mowed along the back alley. But a back alley in a city has to be utilitarian first. So you can still get the garbage trucks and utility trucks down there, and all the services can still be done. But now we've got 12 different native plants and happy pollinators and a little more beautiful space in our city. It took 5 years for the plants to mature, but that was worth waiting for, and the bees could use them along the way. Here's another example, a hard-to-landscape front yard, north-facing, very mature evergreens. But the front yard is almost entirely native species. This one's in Edmonton, another one of my friends. So here's another space. This was my own yard in Edmonton in a brand new subdivision. It was so new that there was still a seed bank of some native species. I let accidental things happen in that I let some of the accidentals come in, like that willow, because there was that one, the pollinators could start using it in April. There's many shrubs that we could be using in the same way. There was one volunteer who worked with us last summer who did a lot of studying. She wanted to change her front yard, and now she has got more than 30 different species of plants in her yard. She changed her entire yard. She called some of the areas formerly wasted space, but a huge amount more space for the pollinators than there was before. This is a yard in Regina where it's typical, a little bit of turf and a hardscape driveway. But the person living here wanted to increase for pollinators the habitat and the number that there were. And her yard is living proof that you don't have to have a huge area. She's got 150 different species of native plants in there. And this year, a Bombus sucklei, which is a threatened species, showed up for the first time ever in her yard. So we've all got our fingers crossed that there will be more Bombus sucklei there next year. If we're reimagining urban places to put to put native plants, we could consider building more resilience into the turf that's there. I call it turf wars. Because do we really have to turf the turf? Every time we dig the plants up, we're actually putting carbon back into the atmosphere that's going to take a long time to bring it back in. These native plants I found when I was looking for birds, actually. They're all growing below mower height, and they don't have any special care. They're treated exactly the same way as the turf, and they're surviving quite nicely. The same with this very popular playground that's down in Joplin, Missouri. Everything's treated exactly like the turf, and yet we've got these native plants. You can't see it in the picture, but it's actually a field of blue and white and yellow if you're standing looking over it. So there is a possibility there, if we can find a way to do it, that we could introduce plants without disturbing the turf that's already there. So we found some places where we can put them, but are there actually enough city dwellers? Well, you feel good about doing it, but we need to have enough people doing this to make a difference. StatsCan says there's 11% of Canada's land is privately owned. So yes, that's a huge amount of land. Audubon said there's 500,000 square kilometers of residential land in the US that is controlled by the people living there. Are there enough people? Well, half the population in the 3 prairie provinces and the 2 states, I said Montana here, but it's actually the 2 states below, are living in an urban area. And although the maps show those areas as being gray and only the parks as being green, there's a lot of space in that gray area. It's not all roads and buildings, a lot of spaces we can use. So from the biggest cities to the towns and villages, there is 4 million of us living in the cities. So there's a lot of us here. We can make a difference. There's enough of us here to make a difference. What if each one of the homeowners were to just build 1 square meter of native plants into their yard? Purposely, specifically for the pollinators and birds. There was 3 dozen bumblebees on these 6 or 7 sunflowers when I took this photo, and there was an American goldfinch that's a frequent visitor to that yard. Businesses, each business owner, this one has the 2 pots. We planted them for her with native plants this year. They amount to about a square meter, and plus she's got more plants along the alley. So every industrial site, every office building, every apartment, every condo, if just a square meter in front of the building or at the front entrance, could that make a difference? Well, if instead we said a square meter for each person living there, that's 4 million square meters. In some cities, that would amount to more green space. This particular park is the one project that I had to add the biodiversity by adding in the native plants right by where I was living. So 10 plants in each one of those square meters, and we'd have 39 million more plants. If we put in 20, if we chose carefully, we could do that. 78 million more plants in our 7 cities. I think the bees and the butterflies and the birds would notice a difference. If we're planning for the pollinators, we need to plan for their babies too. I call them babies because people need to make the connection about these awkward looking teenagers and some of the things, our landscaping habits, to take care of those babies at the same time. 75% of the pollinators can live on, I say 3 families here. It's 1 family, the Asteraceae, but the asters, goldenrods, and sunflowers. So if we plant in communities, then that helps the pollinators in that it doesn't matter what happens on any one particular year to one species of plant. If we plant about 10 at a time, it reduces the bees' commute time, especially if we give them nesting area close to the close to where they are foraging. Plan what you have to, but give the plants some freedom to choose their friends. They do actually like living with some plants better than others, and they like to live in some places better than others. So if we watch them and take cues from them, they'll be happier and we'll be happier because we'll spend a lot less time managing them. If we reimagine private and public spaces for the pollinators and we want to increase their density, then we need to be planning for a longer season too. And in April, we usually can't get into our gardens. It's too wet and other reasons. So we need to rely on things like the wolf willow. And this willow was in my backyard. That one's the pop-up one. And I kept it because one year I think there was even forage out there in late March. But definitely by April, the overwintering butterflies like that Milbert's tortoiseshell and these 3 species of bees are finding the pollen that they need. Otherwise, they come out, they look around, and they go back where they were for another few weeks. If we're going to reimagine the public and private spaces, then we also need to plan on the other end. So right around the time that we're wanting to clean up our garden, you know, just in case it snows, we need to be making sure that the pollinators have got enough forage for the migrators, for the ones to get south, and the birds for the ones to get south, and the ones that are going to hang around here and overwinter, they need to be strong so they can get through our tough winters. Some of the spring plants actually start to bloom again in the fall, and it's very smart on the plant's part because that means there's better chance of having the pollinators around in the spring that they need. I don't think that's an accident at all. Those plants were blooming the 2nd week of October still. Here's a thought. The little prince discovered what it was that he needed to know. I'm just amazed at the number of people who are in gardens all the time that still don't quite make the connection about keeping the caterpillars. The native plants are, they know how to withstand being foraged. They know how to stand being grazed. They've got built in those long roots for storing their resources that they need to come back after being. So we can trust the plants to be smart enough to know how to cope with the caterpillars. And we need to allow more caterpillars. The number 1 reason that we need to allow the caterpillars is to feed the birds. One little chickadee family needs 500 caterpillars a day to raise their nestlings to fledge. This little oriole took out the entire web of those caterpillars in the space of about 20 minutes, and then he took off. I hadn't seen him. Also, the predators, the caterpillars and the other insects we're worried about have got predators here. The invasive ones don't, but the others, yes, they do. One dilemma that we do need to be careful of when we're switching over to the native plants, like in my yard down there, is the pollinators are counting on the weeds. I had tons of dandelions and bellflowers, so I had to replace those with flowering plants before I could actually get rid of them. Planting in communities, you get happier plants at the native plant garden. We put the plants in, yes, so it's planned, but we let them choose their friends. So this group of plants comes back year after year. They're very happy. They love living together. Happy plants, happy pollinators, and happy gardeners because they spend a lot less time trying to maintain. We need to look at the ground skin for those pollinator babies because the bees, there's 75% of the bees are ground nesters. So we need to have ground covers that will allow them to have some space. So that means a few plants, not always turf. They can't get through the turf to make their nests. The other reason for having a permeable ground that isn't all turf is so we can feed the birds. Chet Neufeld kindly let me share this wallet card with you. It's an awesome wallet card. You can have it beside you when you're ordering online or take it with you to the store. And he has got, under the red column, the list of the plants that people like to put in their gardens when they don't know about the natives. If somebody's wanting to switch over to native plants, he's got an equivalent plant that looks a lot like it, or and will have many more benefits. So that's a lot into one short space, and we've discovered that we do have a lot of space. We've got enough people to make a difference for the pollinators, and it's something so simple that we can actually we can make a difference for all of these pollinators. So I want to thank Kim Mann, Patrick, and Jolene for their photos of their gardens. Thanks to Chet for his wallet card. And thanks to each of you who goes out and finds one more spot in a place that hasn't got any native plants for our pollinators. Thank you very much. And one last thought for people who live in cities, which is a very tamed area. And then if there's any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. See you at the discussion otherwise.
Thank you so much, Gail. That was a really fascinating presentation. I want to give you an extra special thank you because I know the learning curve with this click meeting and feed loop technology hasn't been easy, but for our listeners out there, Gail referred to herself once as a problem-solving techie nerd. So I know it hasn't been easy, so thank you for taking the time to learn this. You can give this amazing presentation to us. We do have a couple minutes for questions. I guess the first one, Gail, is people are wondering about that Grow Me wallet card from Chat at the Native Plant Society. Maybe if you get a chance, you could type the link in the lobby afterwards or in the session notes too. Or,
I can do that.
Yeah, that would be awesome. This looks like a really good resource. I'd even made a note too. I need to check this out afterwards. So
it's awesome. I can do that.
Yeah, what a great idea to keep that with you. So we do have a few questions from our listeners, and I will just pop them up. The first one here. Do you have some recommendations for reliable sources for native plants if you're ordering online or going to a store? Wouldn't want an invasive or identification errors to lead to a mess in lieu of nice native plants.
That is an excellent question. Thank you very much for that. It's one that I struggle with myself when we're looking for more plants. My best resource right now in Saskatchewan is going to the Native Plant Society's list of available plants and available suppliers. If you're in Saskatchewan, that's where I would start. I do know that in Alberta there are lists for that area. So go to your own if you can. There's other ones. There's Manitoba. They do tend to tell from who's in the other provinces too. So if you go to Chet Neufeld's, you'll find out about the ones from Alberta for sure, and I think Manitoba as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer. Alicia is wondering, what native species have you seen succeed in isolated containers?
Oh, I like that one because I've been experimenting. So I've done asters, fleabanes, the small plants, I can't think of the name of them. They're little tiny and white. I try everything just to see if it will grow. Some of the asters and fleabanes lasted 4 years in one of the bigger pots. So I was thrilled to find that out because that's a lot of plants going in there. So the best thing is to just use a fair size pot. It needs to be winterized, one that can last over the winter. And make sure that there's snow cover on that pot over the winter. And I think you'll have a lot of fun finding out what can grow in those pots.
Interesting. I also want to mention that in the poster session, John Paul Wasson has a poster all about doing native plants in containers. So I think it's worth checking out there too.
Definitely.
A listener named Cam says, thank you. You provided a few examples of public space where low-growing native species coexist with turf. Do you happen to know if these native species were introduced or were they volunteer from the remnant seed bank? Do you have any ideas?
I suspect that they are volunteers because I know at the Regina Cemetery they would not have planted any native plants in there. They are, so I think they're pop-ups. They're native plants pop up everywhere. Down in Joplin, Missouri, absolutely not. They didn't plant those. They were pop-ups.
Okay, interesting. And our last question from Cameron, you mentioned goldenrods, asters, and sunflowers can cover 75% of pollinators. Which families or species would you add to bring it to 90% or more?
I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to investigate that yet. I've been working on the 75% that Douglas Ptolemy mentioned, just finding the best of the asters, the best of the goldenrods, and the best of the sunflowers for each situation, because not all of them grow in every situation best. They're not all happiest there. And then finding the other plants that will grow with them. So we've got a long growing season. I'm sorry, I don't have a set answer for what grows with them.
No problem. That's okay. I know we have a lot more questions in the chat box, and we're out of time. So, Gail, if you had a couple minutes and want to reply to a few, you're welcome to. Otherwise, Gail will be in the Feed Loop discussion group at 11:30 as well. So, people are
Okay,
welcome to go check that out there.
okay,
So, thank you again, Gail, for the
thank you.
awesome presentation.
Yes, thank you.
And I'd like to call up our next presenter, Kezia Lesko-Goslin. She will be talking about You Won't Believe It, Building an Urban Pollinator Park in Medicine Hat, Alberta. So thank you for being here, Kezia, and I'll let you take it away.
All right, so good morning, everybody, and thank you all for attending this session. I'm really enthusiastic to present here today at the Native Prairie Restoration and Reclamation Workshop. It's an exciting experience for me, not only because I got to work on a project that was so fun, but also as I'm speaking alongside a lot of people who I look up to, so that's quite cool as well. So to introduce myself again, I'm Kezia Lesko-Goslin. I'm the Parks Technician for City of Medicine Hat Parks and Recreation. I obtained a Bachelor of Science in Environmental and Conservation Sciences from University of Alberta, which is where I first got a love for reclamation and native plant species. And I'm currently studying towards a Master of Public Health from University of Waterloo as well. So the focus of my presentation today is the Police Point Pollinator Park in Medicine Hat, Alberta, and it was a really exciting project to be involved with. This project integrates so many things I love, from urban reclamation to volunteering, recreation to sustainability, and last but not least, a lot of puns about bees. But corny jokes aside, I had so much fun working on this project, and I hope this presentation serves as a case study highlighting key elements for success that may help the development of other similar projects. I also wanted to start off by thanking all stakeholders for their contributions to this project, particularly City of Medicine Hat Parks and Recreation, the volunteers who really kept this project going, and Medicine Hat College and Actus. Now, without further ado, I will ask you to behave as I begin the presentation. You won't believe it, building an urban pollinator park in Medicine Hat, Alberta. So before I look at our pollinator park in particular, the Police Point Park Pollinator Park, I wanted to cover some of the many benefits associated with pollinator parks. So first, there are some clear, obvious environmental benefits associated with these areas. So increasing native pollinator habitat is likely to in turn support native pollinator populations, of course, and positively influence local native plant communities. Now, while one single park may not have that significant of an impact, I believe that if communities establish many areas like these, there may be greater environmental benefit. I also believe that public pollinator parks have the capacity to encourage individuals to establish pollinator-friendly gardens at home, further amplifying the environmental benefits. So in addition to environmental benefits, I found that, like in particular with this project, community pollinator parks have the capacity to increase cooperation and communication between public service and community stakeholders, encourage community and volunteer engagement, and really put sustainability into action and show what this means environmentally, economically, and socially. And finally, one unanticipated benefit I realized over the past year working on this project is how spaces like public pollinator parks are key to the longevity of community interaction and engagement, which is evidenced by our current public health situation. So while our current requirements for isolation are limiting our capacity to interact with each other in person, outdoor recreation and education infrastructure provides community engagement opportunities while allowing us to keep safe. Now, because of the undeniable benefits associated with public pollinator parks, of course, City Medicine Hat Parks and Rec wanted to create their own. So this idea came about some years before I started with the department. However, the project did not come to fruition until 2020. From what I've heard, previous attempts were missing some elements required for success, and the park didn't really work out. But this year, we stuck with a formula that I think may lead to success for most budding pollinator park ideas. While the formula is simple, I do believe that what worked for our little park may work for other similar projects, well adapted to local contexts. So here we have it, the magic formula: logistics plus volunteers plus funding plus liaison equals pollinator park. Now let's start by looking at the first variable in the equation, logistics. So to keep with the theme of the workshop, reclamation and restoration, I think that while this project is much simpler than conventional reclamation, I would still consider it a land reclamation project. While we didn't require any site remediation or intensive landscaping really, the area did significantly change over the past year and looks a lot different than it did before. The Police Point Pollinator Park is aptly named, as it was born from what was essentially a dirt-filled parking lot median in Medicine Hat's Police Point Park. And I apologize for my use of the swear word dirt, but really there was nothing except for weeds growing in this area before, and it needed quite a lot of help to bring it to where it is today. So for local context, Police Point Park is a large, multi-use natural area bordering the South Saskatchewan River in Medicine Hat, Alberta. The park contains some of Medicine Hat's busiest trails, largest cottonwood stands, most gorgeous views, in addition to an interpretive center. Deciding the where for where to establish the park was easy, as Police Point is busy, there are many opportunities for interpretive programming on site, and there just happened to be a very visible empty area requiring landscaping out front. So I like to think of this picture as sort of the Police Point Pollinator Park's before makeover photo. It was taken just after the area was mowed and scraped to remove as many weeds as possible, and after topsoil was brought to and spread on site. So after that, Parks and Rec's next action items were to build a fence around the approximately 10 by 40 meter site and get plants established in our greenhouse to be planted on site in spring. So this is also a very rough schematic of our site, but I just wanted to show our basic site plan. So the garden is separated in two sides so that people can walk down the middle, and this also connects to parking areas on either side of the garden. And there are also gates on each side of the pathway for worker entry, and so people can eventually enter the gardens too. And we also established teardrop-shaped pathways in the gardens so people can enter without trampling the vegetation. So early on in spring, native grass seed was spread on site as a cover crop, and this seed was sourced from the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Association thanks to our lead volunteer, Ron. To further vegetate the site, we focused on sourcing regionally native pollinator-friendly plants from nearby nurseries that, after establishing, will hopefully be self-sufficient or at least quite low maintenance. So plant species were chosen to attract pollinators that rely on various nectar and pollinator sources, which pretty much just means that we wanted to attract many different types of pollinators to the park. We also wanted to select plants with varying blooming times to ensure that pollinators would be attracted to the site all season long. Currently, sunflowers, so plant family Asteraceae, have had the most success in the garden, but these flower later in the summer. So in future seasons, including in 2021, we really want to focus on establishing earlier blooming plants like legumes, so plant family Fabaceae. So native plants were selected to grow in the garden not only as they attract native pollinators, but also as their long-term maintenance requirements will be lower. While 2020 required and 2021 will require significant maintenance, it is anticipated that after a few seasons, the garden should be more self-sufficient with less maintenance required. And now it's time for a bee break. So pictured here are some of the pollinators we want to attract. So including those from the genera Bombus, bumblebees, Megachile, leafcutter bees, Osmia, mason and orchard bees, and Agapostemon, metallic sweat bees. And I apologize to any Latin enthusiasts to whom I'm probably butchering these names, but bear with me. So all our desired pollinators are pollinators of native flowers and coincidentally of commercial crops too, like the alfalfa leafcutter bee and blue orchard bee, for example. The garden is also likely to attract other pollinators aside from bees, such as beetles, moths, and butterflies. Police Point Park is also frequented by larger animals such as porcupines, many types of birds, bats, and bunnies, so I think it'll be fascinating to see if these animals also have an impact on the spread of native flowering species throughout the entire park and not just in the pollinator garden. So regular garden maintenance requirements included planting, watering, and weeding, of course. Planting took place over the course of the season as new plugs were purchased intermittently and flats of juvenile plants were transported over a few trips from the Parks and Rec greenhouse. We also tried to plant on cooler days to help the juvenile vegetation survive a little bit more. But weeding, however, and watering, of course, took place several times a week. So watering took place pretty much daily when temperatures were hottest and a few times a week when it was a little bit cooler. Now Medicine Hat and this region is of course famous for its hot and dry summers, so juvenile flowering plants needed quite a bit of attention. Mother Nature helped us out quite a bit last year by giving us a cooler and wetter summer, but we always get a few scorching weeks that require more time in the garden. But overall, there were volunteers working in the park most days this past spring and summer, which we are very grateful for. So in 2020, site landscaping was quite minimal as our primary goal was just to get plants growing on site. We did, however, have some volunteer-made bee houses installed on site attached to the fence. We constructed our pathways of wood chips sourced from the our volunteers helped construct the pathways, which were sourced from Parks and Rec tree prunings. Some informative signage was also installed on site, and a teepee-like structure was brought to site, which will act as a trellis in future seasons. So these photos are, of course, one of our bee houses, and then we have our volunteer Ron here helping to distribute the wood chips to create a pathway. So here are some of the signs currently posted at the Police Point Pollinator Park. In the future, we'd really like to have more detailed educational and interpretive signage on site, but the intent this year was just to keep things simple and friendly and to inform visitors of what was taking place in the area, as the garden is not as lively as we anticipate it will be in future seasons. So moving on to the second variable in our equation, volunteers. In addition to Medicine Hat and Enactus, a team of 4 incredible volunteers were central to this project's success. This picture shows Medicine Hat College Enactus team members Darren and Adriana on the left, followed by volunteer Keiko Lanowski in the middle, then Ron Lanowski, another volunteer, and Manuela Franco, our final volunteer, and myself. Unfortunately, one of our volunteers, Sydney Bascard, couldn't be pictured here, but I wish to thank her as well because she was also a major contributor to the project. Honestly, the Pollinator Park would not have worked without our volunteers, and today I want to acknowledge their efforts, but also stress how integral volunteers are to many public projects and services. So as you're likely aware, public services such as municipal parks and rec departments are under strict budgets. And speaking for Medicine Hat, maintaining a strong volunteer force is one of the only ways we can maintain some of our services like the Police Point Pollinator Park. This being the case, finding and retaining volunteers is really meaningful to the department and a great way to increase community engagement with public projects and public liaison. The Pollinator Park crew was so fantastic to work with. Ron is an instructor at the Medicine Hat College as well as ecology expert. Keiko studied agriculture at University of Alberta, and both Manuela and Sydney studied reclamation at the Medicine Hat College. And having such a stacked team increased evidence-informed decision-making for the project, in addition to volunteer ownership and responsibility. This crew really knew and felt that they were contributing to something greater than themselves. Being able to match volunteers with projects they care about increases volunteer satisfaction, improves volunteer recruitment, and just contributes to better services overall. So finally, I want to thank all our volunteers once more, giving over 150 hours each over the course of spring and summer. Their commitments and hard work were really significant, and the garden would not have been buzzing without them. Now, I want to acknowledge how, aside from volunteers, we are so thankful for the collaboration with Medicine Hat College and Actus. On this note, we've come to the third component of our equation, money and funding. This project was established thanks to contributions from City of Medicine Hat, Parks and Rec, as well as the before-mentioned Enactus. Parks and Rec had a small budget dedicated to the project, but the Pollinator Park's higher quality is undoubtedly thanks to additional contributions from Enactus. Keiko, one of our park volunteers, is also a member of Enactus, and that really helped out as all the money our volunteers spent on the project did come from Enactus funding. Generally speaking, the more money you put into a garden, the more it's likely to grow and the more diverse it may be. So while Parks and Rec primarily brought land, infrastructure, and utilities to the table, the Pollinator Park's increased plant diversity and creative landscaping are large in part thanks to external help. On the note of funding, another way volunteers contributed to the park is by greatly decreasing the labor expenditures required from Parks and Recreation. This park incurred various benefits. First, we, meaning the department, could spend more money on plants and garden logistics, but second, this also significantly helped our 2020 situation as we lost many temporary spring and summer workers due to pandemic layoffs, and without volunteers, the Pollinator Park would have been collateral damage as well. So we'll now turn to the fourth and final component of the Pollinator Park equation, liaison. Communications and promotions. So these were overarching themes during project planning and implementation. Over the course of the project, City Corporate Communications, this department of the city, was involved to create informational material for the park. And together we developed the signage shown earlier in the presentation, which will be on site until the garden is a little less juvenile. And I envision future signage will be more detailed and interpretive, as I mentioned before, but for initial garden establishment, we just thought these were really cute and friendly to have on site. And we also worked to create a little promotional video, which is on the city's YouTube page, which we can show here now.
And I just want to remind everyone to turn up their volume. The video is a little bit quiet, so crank the volume on your speaker.
Thanks.
This is the Louise Point Pollinator Park. Right now we have a lot of native grass seed and native seedlings in the area.
We are trying to attract native pollinators, so that would be bumblebees, basin bees, leafcutter bees, and sweat bees. Now we'll also attract moths and butterflies, okay, other species of pollination also.
We're all really passionate about the population in Alberta and Canada.
We decided to start this last summer once we got a grant from the Community Foundation of Southeast Alberta through the RBC Future Launch Accelerator Program. We actually found this amazing group that's just all super passionate about our environment and our community and therefore the bee population.
So everything you see here is native. We have native grasses, and interseeded with those native grasses are native plants, which is what our native pollinators are going to forage on.
When we started working with environmental reclamation, we found out that there were very specific bee populations that were attracted to specific flowers and the little houses that we have up on the fence here.
Bee nesting boxes on the fence posts and in the ground, to give them opportunities, to nest. So hopefully it works,
thanks to the college for all their hard work on this. It's been really fantastic to have extra hands and extra funds helping out with the project.
We can have youth interacting, we can have the public interacting, and we can kind of maintain our own little version of an ecosystem here to support our bee population.
It's going to be a bit of a longer term project just for the plants to grow and become established, and for the garden to be self-sustaining as well. So it's a few years out before its completion. Really looking forward to see what grows in here in the meantime.
Sorry, Kezia, you're still muted.
Sorry, I realized I was on mute. So
Okay.
thank you for watching that video. In addition to working with city corporate communications, I also worked pretty frequently with a writer from the Medicine Hat News. Oh, and I thought to switch my slide here, of course, here too, who took a lot of photos and put together some stories on the Pollinator Park. And this was really beneficial as well because the city's social media isn't as frequented by the Medicine Hat population as many people who look at our local newspaper. So that was really great. So Enactus has also partnered with Ready Enterprises, which is a local nonprofit association assisting people with disabilities to create a promotional campaign for the park. This is a really interesting and fascinating campaign that combines elements of social and environmental sustainability, and I look forward to seeing their deliverables. But I do, however, want to push the city this year to create a campaign that's more focused on education and take-home messaging. Now that we're past the kind of what's growing in the garden phase, I think it's important to educate people on the extensive benefits of pollinator parks and how individuals can take practices employed at Police Point and use them at home. We don't really need help encouraging people to visit Police Point Park as it's already a really frequented and notable destination in Medicine Hat, but I would like to see the park used in more on-site interpretation. COVID threw us for a bit of a loop when it came to programming capabilities, but I do anticipate the garden will become a center for education and scientific communications in upcoming seasons. This step will, of course, require further liaison and planning in conjunction with local schools and the Police Point Park Interpretive Center, but I'm really excited to work on that too. And I do also want to note how the park is not only beneficial for its educational potential, but also as an opportunity to highlight something good-looking that Parks and Recreation is doing. And this is applicable to many other municipal Parks and Rec departments too. Many of our services go unnoticed, which is pretty common with city departments, and the Police Point Pollinator Park is the perfect opportunity to showcase something beautiful and uplifting that we can work on. And I just want to add a little plug here to thank the Parks and Rec Horticultural Services and Facilities team, as they also put in a lot of work to help make the Police Point Pollinator Park happen. So as it stands, the Pollinator Park is quite barren, especially as it is February. However, the future plans for the garden include a lot more detailed work, and really looking forward to working on it this year. So within the next few seasons, we plan to increase varied pollinator habitat on site. So this includes increasing bare ground patches, bee houses, areas with clumps of plant debris, and installing a tree stump with holes drilled in it on site too, which will hopefully become sort of a bee hotel. And we'll also have a few bee baths on site, which should further support pollinator populations. Our volunteers have very thankfully voiced a strong commitment to the Police Point Pollinator Park, which is fantastic news as we really need them. We anticipate that maintenance inputs will decline over the next few years. However, this year we do plan on using the Parks and Rec greenhouse again to grow new plant species to further plant on site, and we do plan on following similar maintenance schedules. So as it stands, it's winter and there isn't much happening in the garden, but here's a snapshot of what the site will probably look like today if you visit the Police Point Pollinator Park. I included this photo so you can catch a glimpse of the pathways, the trellis, the fence, and the vegetation that we hope will return in spring. And once the garden is alive and more self-sustaining, we do plan to leave the gates open for people to stroll through. I imagine the Police Point Pollinator Park will be a great place to go and learn about the environment, maybe sit and read a book while listening to buzzing bees, or engage with local ecology nerds and people who care about building community. And there we have it, a short introduction to the Police Point Pollinator Park. So thank you all for listening to this presentation, and I hope it was both informative and maybe even a bit inspiring too. What worked for us may not work for everyone, but I do think most of our project planning and implementation strategies may help lead to the success of other pollinator parks or similar projects. As I mentioned, our park is not very buzzing right now, but as I am optimistic, I included this photo from the city of Calgary to show a vision of what we do anticipate the park looking like, and just to show how easy it is to establish coexistence between urban centers and naturalized pollinator-friendly areas. So thank you again for your time, and yeah, now I'll welcome any questions.
Thank you, Kezia, for the unbelievable presentation. So we do have quite a few questions. There's been some discussion going on. A few people are wondering how you clean and maintain the bee boxes.
Yeah, so actually, if there's any really specific questions too, I can give out my email as well if people want to, if I need to get in touch with our bee expert Ron as well. But yeah, so the bee boxes, I think they're pretty low maintenance once they're established. They kind of act as a little home for the bees too. So I think most of the cleaning and maintenance is actually done by the bees themselves. And yeah, so we put them up, and pretty much if there's any issues, if they fall off the fence or something, I think that's where we come in really. So, yeah.
And you don't need re-drill holes or anything like that then?
You know, I
any old material.
Maybe if there's I guess you could do regular inspections just to see that everything is looking all right, and if there's any issues with them, maybe just to make sure they aren't invaded by any other, like any wasps or anything, maybe.
Yeah.
But then yeah, just kind of doing regular checkups, and if anything looks really plugged up, then I guess you could probably do some work, and maybe during winter too would be a good time to do maintenance on the infrastructure itself.
Okay. Do you take the bee houses in the winter time, or do you leave them up?
Actually, we left them up this year. So yeah, I'm sure you could take them in if you wanted to, but yeah, maybe if you left them out all year, then maybe in early spring you could just make sure that they're free from debris or any other any other animals that may have nested in there over the winter or something. So yeah.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Rebecca is wondering, what main weeds did you have issues with? It looks like lamb's quarters potentially.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Actually, that's kind of another question that I'll have to ask our volunteers for, because they were the ones who did the regular weeding. But yeah, I think lamb's quarters, I assume, like we had Police Point has a significant crested wheat. I won't say issue because some people love crested wheatgrass, except it's definitely not a desired plant for our garden. So that was something that we just had to keep an eye out for as well. And really any weeds, I think in general, like mustard was really growing on site, especially before we established any of the plants. So really just kind of common weeds for the area. But I guess too, in this case, like weeds, we could classify as just anything we didn't necessarily want growing in the area. So just if we didn't, even some of the grass that we planted like as a cover crop, we needed to take out a bit just because it was growing really well, but taking up some of the space that our flowering plants would eventually take up. So yeah.
Thanks for that answer. And along those lines, Andrea is wondering what species were in your native cover crop?
Oh yeah, okay, so the PFRA seed, I think there was just a lot of locally native grasses. We had just a few like Bouteloua gracilis, Pascopyrum smithii, so western wheatgrass, and shoot, I can't remember gracilis.
Blue grandma.
Yeah, that's it. So, and I think stipcom was in that too. So needle and thread grass. I think those are the main compositions. There may have been some colmac, so June grass as well. And those are just, yeah, our typical native desired grasses for this area.
Great. And Patricia is wondering where the topsoil was from.
Yeah, so our topsoil was actually just from a local contractor. So we could have done a better job at sourcing, I guess, weed-free topsoil, but I think during the public services contracting process, things may have gotten a little bit muddled. And yeah, so we just had normal topsoil, which probably came from somebody's pile, I assume, just from a local, they built our fence as well from a local contracting company. But yeah, it definitely, oh, sorry, I thought my internet was cutting out for a sec. I would recommend that for future projects to work on sourcing better quality topsoil. I mean, our soil was great, but yeah, it was definitely, it could have been a little more weed-free probably.
Okay, thanks for that answer. There's a few listeners that are writing in about apparently bees do need to be cleaned out annually, Sarah says. There's a risk of parasitoids and diseases.
Okay,
yeah, good to know. And somebody else wrote into Andrea that they can be left out in the winter time, but they should be cleaned out every year. So yeah, good to know. And I think that's all the time that we have today, but Gail Fennell, who just put up a really nice comment. She says, thank you, awesome inspiration for working with the city to create this for native plants. So I think that's a good place to end it. So thank you so much, Kezia, for coming to
thanks to Gail for
this
the great presentation too. So yeah. And yeah, thanks to everyone today. So
it was awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kezia. And we'll make you an attendee so you can catch the rest of the presentations.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, wow, we've had quite the morning so far, but it's not done yet. We have two presenters that are joining us from Edmonton, Alberta, Liz DeLu and Mana Parseon, and they will be talking about the importance of growing locally sourced native plants. So Mana and Liz, you just need to unmute yourself on the AV pod there.
Hello.
Perfect.
Hello.
Excellent. Yes, and you can take it away.
Okay. I'm going to start. So yeah, just set up here. Usually, you know, I like to find more out about the audience and so on, but I'm just gonna go for it. So I'm Liz DeLeo, and I'm joined by Mana Parseon. We're both board members of the Edmonton Native Plant Society, and we'll be talking today about the importance of growing locally sourced native plants. Just want a word about the Native Plant Society. We're all mostly volunteer driven, with the odd maybe summer position or paid position. In the talk, I will start by introducing some of the reasons for locally sourced native plants, and I will show some examples of projects and yards around Edmonton. Then Mana will expand for a little while on some of those reasons, and she will talk about seed collecting and seed cleaning. Then we'll mix it up, and I'll take over again and talk about growing out that seed and finish off with more examples. Technical difficulties. Mana and I both grow native plants in our residential yards. Mana grows them for her small business, Arnica Wildflowers, and I grow for the Edmonton Native Plant Society. While Mana has experience as an earth sciences planner, I have been involved in landscape maintenance, design, and construction since the 1980s. We go to great lengths to get into nature when, as Gail said, nature is all around us in the city. When I was a child, we named the puddles and runoff in the spring after lakes and rivers we knew. We spent countless hours outside immersed in the nature around us, not necessarily with native plants, but eating the caragana flowers, climbing trees, and watching great swarms of bats in the summer. Nature has a way of letting itself be known even in our sterile, cared-for environment. The power of water seeping into basements, the weeds in a perfect lawn, infestations of mice, and the pesky squirrel that greets us daily all remind us that we live with natural elements in our home and yard. Getting locally sourced native plants into the urban landscape brings another aspect of nature into the city. One reason for growing locally sourced native plants is that they have a place in urban landscapes and, of course, in rural landscapes too. Oh, Anna, just lost my notes. Okay. Oh, this slide didn't come through for some reason. It was a painting of Jan Steen's household of Jan Steen, and he was a genre painter from the 17th century. And I had the slide in here because it had faded flowers that were about to be eaten by a pig in a very medieval kind of setting. And the genre movement had those images to remind us that life is short and we should make it worthwhile. So the urban landscape, residential landscape with native plants in it also is short-lived, and we should make it worthwhile. With locally sourced native plants actually in the city, the story and local history of the plant comes to life. Here, Edmonton City Councillors made planters a few years ago filled with locally sourced native plants. And those were from the society, and the shrubs were from a local nursery. The planters were placed along the street outside of City Hall. We did up a few of the planters as well. Pollinators actually found their way to the plants in the urban desert. We were glad that local governing bodies support what we see as a growing movement to make native plants a part of our culture again. The plants that we grow all come from existing or long destroyed local native plant populations with a story. By growing them in demonstration beds and other projects, we build a seed source of those special populations. The provenance of our plants is that they do come from local sources. We sell the seed to gardeners and to those looking to do larger projects. We sell the plants at various venues, actually spreading the knowledge and providing access to the seeds and plants allows people to interact with a part of local natural history. That history extends to upcoming generations through school gardens. This school courtyard includes a native plant garden alongside outdoor classroom space, vegetable and horticultural specimen gardening. The teachers here envision students collecting seed from the native plants and growing out their own plants. So getting into more of the reasons, genetics, and Mana will expand on this. Horticultural perennial cultivars are bred to look exactly the same, to be genetically alike, and to be predictable in the garden. Many are even sterile, which makes the consumer go back to the nursery for more when they die off, as Gaillardia sometimes does. Have you wondered how they grow seedless oranges? Because the seed has been bred out of the fruit, growers take cuttings from the old trees to produce more trees, so they are genetically alike. Locally sourced native plants are genetically diverse. The seeds and plants are easy to share, which may be one of the reasons that garden centers are reluctant to grow them. Locally sourced native plants provide food and habitat to many beings along the way all year round. Here we have a butterfly on meadow arnica and a bee on giant hyssop. Butterflies and bees are in the news right now as pollinators are being noticed. Insects of all kinds, though, find habitat in locally sourced native plants. Here, ants are having a meal from low milkweed flowers. Interesting fact, mosquitoes pollinate some of our native orchids. Indeed, there is still much to understand in the relationships between different species of plants and insects. Habitat in yards is constantly changing, just like everywhere else. This is summer years ago in my front yard to winter last year. My garden is a mixture of nursery source plants and native plants. The clumps of grassy areas in the winter picture are rescued prairie sod pieces from intact native prairie, which was replaced by a road. It is very hard to establish native plants in parks and urban natural areas where there are many aggressive species to compete with them and where there is little to no maintenance. It makes sense, though, to put them in residential landscapes where conditions are better and care is available. Native plants in yards form an urban prairie, just as street trees are part of the urban forest. The yard becomes a sanctuary for species that have no other place to go as their natural habitat dwindles. Another reason, resilience. Locally rare species are saved from local extinction. Local native plants are naturally adapted, hardy to the region and to your garden. This is common tall sunflower. The only known population left in Edmonton proper is right along a major roadway in the ditch between the roadway and the railway line. How it survived there is beyond me. The other population was Little Mountain, which was destroyed by construction of a subdivision. We still have plants grown on from Little Mountain seed and added to the population you see here. We are able to save more local genetic diversity of that species. Here's an example of one of our demonstration beds. This is the Mootar Conservatory demonstration bed, and it's on City of Edmonton property at a famous or near famous tourist attraction. I designed this by having a number of kitchen table meetings with founding members of the group. This was done at a time when I didn't know too much about native plants, so I depended on the information from these members to make up the drawing. And here is the result. The demo bed is a valuable seed source for us. Pussy toes with grasses, meadow blazing star blooming, and all kinds of other things happening. This is another part of the bed. The demonstration beds give the public an idea of how native plants can be used in their gardens. In the home garden, possibilities of working with native plants are endless for a small planting or for a large grouping. Here we have shade plants on the left, Canada violet with tall lungwort blooming in the background, and a little dot of veiny meadow rue along the sidewalk. In the same yard, we have 3 flowered avens, which like sun. So 2 different conditions, 2 different scenarios. There are different native plants for all the different conditions. There's neat and tidy ones for smaller gardens, and that those that spread abundantly for larger settings. I'm going to pass it over now to Mana, and I'll see you a little bit later again.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everyone. I'll be expanding on the reasons for growing locally sourced native plants. The first reason is preserving the genetic diversity of local varieties. The second reason is preserving the local wildlife and maintaining also the local wildlife. And the third reason is maximizing the project success our landscaping, reclamation, and restoration projects. Locally sourced native plants are also called local ecotypes. An ecotype is a group of individuals of the same species that are genetically adapted to their local ecological conditions. Native plants have what is called a local ecotype. That means the plant has genetically evolved and adapted over a very long period of time to the soil and climate conditions of a particular site. Local ecotypes are also more equipped to fend themselves against damages from drought, freezing, common diseases, and insects if planted in that same local region. Research have shown that individual species having a large geographical distribution vary considerably in their physical appearances, as well as plant height, growth habit, and blooming periods. These characteristics are not distributed randomly throughout the range of the species, but are clustered into ecological regions, or also called ecoregions or seed transfer zones. And as it's shown here, ecoregions themselves are categorized into larger areas called ecozones. This map shows the ecozones and ecoregions of Canada, with Edmonton and Regina, those tiny red dots, both in the Prairie's ecozone, but different ecoregions. Aspen Parkland for Edmonton and moist mixed grassland for Regina. Also, a close-up of the Prairie's ecozone have been shown to the left. Seed zones are used to help determine which plant materials would be best adapted to the climate and environment of a particular planting site. Now, let us go back to the reasons for choosing local ecotypes, starting with genetics. All of these flowers belong to the same species, Gaillardia aristata in the Edmonton area. As you can see, the one species itself exhibits genetic diversity, which makes it come in different shapes and colors. The one in the middle does not have any red on the petals. The one to the right has fluted rays, and the one to the left is different from the other two. If you explore the concept of why plant natives in the first place, the main rationale is preserving the native species gene pool, which is unique for any given area and preventing those varieties from going extinct. It is also important to maintain the genetic diversity within each species. You might agree with me that the Gaillardias on this slide are equally amazingly beautiful, and they are all worth preserving. On this slide, Monarda fistulosa, or wild bergamot, and the other common name is bee balm, are shown. Like Gaillardia's flowers, they have different appearances. The photo on the right shows a flower growing out on the top of another one. It is critically important to protect native plant diversity because there has been massive losses of native species since the settlement of Canada by Europeans. The best way to do this is to preserve and protect existing areas with natural vegetation. With the loss of native habitats, we not only lose the native flora, but also other species that depend on those plants, including insects and songbirds. So the conservation and maintaining of native plant population and diversity should always be the first priority. What I have learned from growing native plants is that native plants are individuals, just like people, with their own unique characteristics, because they simply have different genes. Speaking of the same species, here are a bunch of humans. Just look at how different they are. All right. I rest my case. Preserving the local wildlife. On this slide, you'll see many pollinators visiting wildflowers. In the same way plants have adapted to local soil and climate conditions, local wildlife has adapted to thrive on native vegetation. Bees, butterflies, and birds all evolved alongside native plants. Whether it is food source for pollinators or shelter, local plants are vital for the wildlife survival. Native insects are a major food source for native birds, and so on up the food chain. That is according to behavioral ecologist Douglas Ptolemy. Gail also mentioned him and his book from the University of Delaware. His and others' research show that our lawns and exotic plant species, no matter how beautiful they are, from other countries are not feeding our wildlife. Native insects cannot survive on alien plant species. Here are a couple of famous cases of the specialization between host plants and insects. The caterpillars of the monarch butterfly feeds only on the milkweed plant. Right side photos, which are taken at Fort Saskatchewan Prairie north of Edmonton, show the evening primrose moth and evening primrose plant. The evening primrose moth is literally named for the plant it depends on. No evening primrose plant means no evening primrose moth. Here are even more examples of specialization between host plant and insect larvae diet. When caterpillars become adults, they can feed on other plants, but while in the larvae stage, their diet is limited to the host plant. Clockwise, starting from top left, you can see the police car moth and tall longwort, fritillary butterfly and violas, and next one, swallowtail butterfly and carrot family plants, mainly cow parsnip in the Edmonton area. Last photos belong to ladybugs and Western Canada goldenrod. I took these photos of the ladybugs in my native plant garden, witnessing them trying to propagate. I have videos of them. And the middle photo of the ladybugs shows the larva on the same plant. So it was successful. Think of a pair of chickadees, which need to find 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars over the course of 16 days to feed their young. Without the locally sourced native plants for insects and their caterpillars, which they depend on, those caterpillars would not exist, and as a result, our songbird population would steadily go down and decline. Maximizing the success of our projects. We spend thousands of dollars on reclamation, restoration, and landscaping projects. The success of these kind of projects is directly tied to the locality of the plant materials we use. Any attempt to restore or reclaim an area for any species of wildlife depends on having the right vegetation to sustain that particular species. For example, in prairie restoration projects, we need to have grassland with the right species of grasses for the wildlife, which include bison, songbirds, reptiles, bees, butterflies, and so on. Plants suitable for any area are the ones that have already been growing there for thousands of years, optimizing for those specific ecological conditions. This is why you need to use locally sourced native plants or local ecotypes. Now we are going to change direction a little bit and talk about the different steps in growing locally sourced native plants. First, we need to collect the seeds. Before we get started, I want to show you some photos of seeds under the microscope. I took these photos with my cell phone. Take a good look at the photos and try to guess the species. I will give you a few seconds. Here are the flowers. Beautiful, aren't they? Clockwise from top left, crowfoot violet, western wood lily, prairie crocus, the first flower in spring, wild bergamot, purple prairie clover, and at the end, gaillardia, which has a different look from the other three that I showed you before. When it comes to collecting seeds, seeds of the same species should be collected from different populations within the same area. It is also recommended that you collect from different individuals in a population. So if you are collecting, for example, gaillardia seeds, you would collect a few seeds from different individuals, and then you would travel to a nearby population to collect more seeds. In the Edmonton Native Plant Society, when we collect seeds, we follow the same instructions. While collecting in the wild, the general rule is to only collect 10% or less of the available seeds. If the population is sparse or rare, use your good judgment to determine how much seed the plant can spare. Seed is valuable to the plant looking to reproduce. It is also valuable for food and habitat for insects, birds, and other animals. Seeds are an essential part of an intact ecosystem, and they should be collected thoughtfully. Also, remember to record the location and the date of seed collection on the collection bags as soon as you collect the seeds. Otherwise, you would forget. The Edmonton Native Plant Society volunteers collect seeds from various places such as our demo beds, private gardens, and various other sites, mainly the two native prairies we manage. For Saskatchewan Prairie, northeast of Edmonton, you can see them on this map, and Nisku Prairie, south of Edmonton. This map also shows Gibbons Badland Prairie towards northeast. I added Bunchberry Meadows to this map because Edmonton Native Plant Society has a few native plant beds and restoration planting activities there. Next, I will show you photos of the three prairies, and later, Liz is going to talk about Bunchberry Meadows. Here you can see the landscape and some of the native plants in Fort Saskatchewan Prairie. Having been involved with the restoration and maintenance work at Fort Saskatchewan Prairie and Nisku Prairie, I have realized how valuable these sites are. We humans have used or tilled essentially every square inch of land for our cities and agriculture and destroyed the natural habitats that originally existed. These remnant prairies only exist because their soil was too sandy and not suitable for agriculture. These sites are precious and rare. They are the living blueprints that we can use for restoration and reclamation projects. I have recorded 42 species of birds on site or flyover in Fort Saskatchewan Prairie during the summer and fall. I'm sure winter birds such as redpoles and Bohemian waxwings are also around. Here you see the photos of some of them. When we have a healthy ecosystem, native plants, pollinators, and birds coexist, and this is what we see in a remnant prairie. On this slide, you can see the landscape and some of the native plants and vegetation overall in Nisku Prairie. An aspen parkland remnant that was never cultivated. Nisku Prairie is also a productive bird habitat because it has the right vegetation and therefore food and shelter for the local birds. Gibbons Badland Prairie is the last prairie that I'll be showing you photos of. I hope you're not tired of them. Many beautiful native species are found here, such as the prickly pear cactus and scarlet mallow, which we do not see in the other two prairies. After we have collected the seeds from all of these places that I mentioned, we need to clean them. Our Edmonton Native Plant Society volunteers clean the seeds by shaking the seeds in tins, lightly crushing them with rolling pins, and passing them through multiple sieves. The cleaned and labeled seeds then get bagged and stored in fridges and freezers. Now, at this point, I'd like to share with you my experience in creating a native plant garden. I started by taking out a large portion of my lawn in the fall of 2018 and planted just a few species at that time. Then in 2019, I added a few more plants. If you look at the dates for each photo, starting with June 2019 and ending with October 2020, you see how it looks like just after 2 years. I leave the dried plants in the garden during the fall and winter for the birds to eat the seeds and use the dried branches as a perch. I should also tell you that I do not water my garden. Whatever comes from the sky, whatever comes down from the sky is what it gets. I have not used a drop of chemicals or fertilizers either. When it comes to weeds, I just had to deal with a few dandelions and the non-native forget-me-not that was in the garden before and found its way into the garden later. To tell you a short story, before I took out the lawn, there was a small anthill on one side of it. It showed up again in 2019 at the same location, but this time in the new garden. Last year in early spring, someone who was visiting my garden, my yard and garden, asked me, "You have an anthill in the garden. What are you going to do about it?" She seemed concerned. I responded to her that I do nothing. I just leave them be. Later, plants grew and covered the the anthill completely. In summer, I saw a pair of northern flickers coming often to the garden. They would hang around the area that anthill existed, and when I looked closely, they were eating those ants. I look forward to seeing the ants and the northern flickers in the garden again this year. Since the time that I have had my native plant garden, I have noticed many more birds coming to visit. Here you see the photos of just a few of them, warblers and pine siskin. In fact, last year there was a single day when I noticed 4 different species of warblers visiting the garden. They were the yellow-rumped, Tennessee, orange-crowned, and yellow warblers. If I was able to create a native plant garden and be successful, anyone else can do it too. You can start with planting natives, especially the locally sourced ones, anywhere you are allowed, such as your backyard or front yard. Then you will not only have more sources of native plant seeds, which you can use for more projects, but you'll get to enjoy the other benefits like preserving the genetic diversity of the local varieties, preserving the local wildlife, and having a resilient landscape. That's it for me. Thank you for giving me your attention. And now Liz is going to continue the presentation by teaching you how to grow native plants. She is really, really good.
Well, I'm back, and thank you, Mana. You were really good too. Growing from seed can be easy or difficult, and many factors contribute to the success or failure of a planting. Some are seed viability, potting material, available light, ventilation, how easy the species is to grow, how the planting's cared for, and the watering needs of the species. There's many factors for sure. Many native plants need stratification, and in the horticultural context, stratification means simulating spring conditions which cause the seed to break dormancy and to germinate. First method is natural stratification. You plant the seeds directly into the garden or in a pot outside in the late fall. Keep them snow-covered for the winter and keep them moist when the snow melts. If you plant directly into the garden, mark where you have planted the seeds. If you plant into pots, put them into an area where they will thaw evenly in the spring, where you don't have excessive sunlight. The north or east side of the house will likely work. We have found this method to work for most species, and generally it produces less seedlings than the other methods that I'm going to talk about. Sometimes you have to wait into the summer before germination occurs with this method, so be patient. The second method is the cold dry stratification. You simply put the seeds in an envelope in the fridge for 6 weeks before planting them indoors in early spring. This method has the advantage in that the seeds can be directly planted into separate pots. It's a simple way to stratify and has worked well for our growers. The third is cold moist stratification. You put the seeds into a baggie of 50-50 mix of sand and peat moss at a ratio to 5 parts mixed to 1 part seed. Add just enough water to moisten and put the baggie in the fridge for 6 weeks. This method most closely simulates natural stratification. Use more of the mix to increase the chance of more space between the seedlings as they come up in the pot. We mark the bag with the species, the seed source, which here is mixed, and the date the stratifying begins. What's going on?
Yeah, the feed loop is coming. So.
Oh, here we go. They go into the fridge for 6 weeks. Check the baggies often as the weeks pass to make sure the seeds have not sprouted already. If they have, plant them. After 6 weeks in the fridge, spread the mixture from the baggie onto the tops of pots filled with a potting mix that does not have soil in it. The no soil mix helps to prevent damping off, which is a fungal disease that causes the stem and the roots to rot. Oh, it says not connected. As you can see here, different species come up at different rates. Some pots are full of seedlings, others are not. Some species need a lot of patience. I put the ones that have not germinated by late spring out into the yard for a time to see if they will sprout. When the seeds are ready to prick out, that is to separate them and to pot them up, we put them into pots of appropriate size. The key to this method is transplanting the seedlings at the right time. We found last year that we waited too long with the wild blue flax. The roots were too entangled and the transplants died off, mostly because we mangled them getting them apart. This is generally not the case with most species though. The seedlings are then grown on outside or in the cold frame greenhouse. The native plants that we grow are mostly perennials and can be overwintered in pots. For overwintering, I have the flats placed closely together and or buried in the soil. Lately, some species don't get a chance to stay in my backyard too long as demand for them is great. In our experience, some native plants grow without stratification. They can be planted inside or outside in the spring. The exception here with grasses is blue grama grass. They do need stratification. Most other grasses don't, in Edmonton at least. More native plants in yards. This is the same woodland garden. It's diversity in a small space. Here we have tall lungwort blooming, fairy bells, baneberry, sarsaparilla, Canada violet, and buckbrush. The tree is a massive mountain ash, which is not native to Edmonton, but the other species don't mind that. Combined landscapes that use all of the species we now have are fully possible in yards. This is the same garden in the sun, golden aster softening the line of a sidewalk. I'm going to finish off by reviewing a few of the projects that I have been involved in. Some of them Mana's been involved in too. The first is the Land Stewardship Center garden, where volunteers planted a native plant garden. This drawing is for beds near the building. And here is the overall concept plan. The red circles are where we cut into existing mulch that had landscape fabric under it. We planted large groupings of shade-tolerant or semi-shade tolerant plants in these circles, leaving only mulch around the plants. This created islands of plants in the sea of mulch. Here we are planting the circles of semi-shade native plants into the mulch. Here is the garden in the second year. You can see an island of smooth fleabane just across the sidewalk. This project is one I did last year. We planted a backyard with over 90% native plants. It features a native grass area, and in that grass area it's Rocky Mountain fescue, June grass, poverty oak grass, and some sedges that don't need a lot of moisture. Here is Bunchberry Meadows, and it's a Nature Conservancy of Canada property, and the Edmonton and Area Land Trust is also affiliated with the project. The planting site used to be part of an area around a dugout when the property was a cattle ranch. So the soil here is very rich and native plants grow abundantly here. This is the second year of planting, and you can see the former dugout is now a small wetland on the far left, and the driveway into the visitors' parking lot can be seen on the right. This is another picture of the same planting area. Giant hyssop blooming with common tall sunflower in the background. The second restoration site is just across the driveway, and it's completely different. This is across the driveway. The soil here was scraped down to subsoil during construction. So this site has very impoverished soil. Plants are small but tough and healthy. This is only the second year of planting, so these plants will fill in, spread out, move about, and gradually take over the walking paths as well. We planted species from seed collected in sandy, dry prairies so that they would be able to adapt to conditions here. This is an area on the dry side that is beginning to fill in. One important point is that native plants, as they establish, will tell you where they want to grow. Even in residential landscapes, some species may move around a little. Another interesting point about this slide is that some of the seeds used to grow these plants came from native plant gardens in the city. Those plants have made it full circle, so to speak. That's our talk for today. Thanks for joining us. Here you have an example of the pollinators thanking us for our efforts. Here are references. Also, a note that the people on the photos have all been contacted, and we have our email addresses there and also the Edmonton Native Plant Society link. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much for the awesome presentation. It was really detailed and really, really good information for our listeners. And I'm really excited for spring to come and I can get back to my native prairie garden. So thank you both.
Sorry for the glitches. We lost you there for a bit, but anyways.
Okay. I think everything looked good on our end, though. We didn't notice.
All right.
Yeah. So we do have a few questions from listeners. So I will just put the first one up. A few people are actually interested to know, what do you use for a no soil mix?
Okay. For the seedling planting, I use the BX Pro Mix, the bales from, and there's also the BX has a smaller particle. You can also use the HP mix, and that's also a 3.8 kilogram bale, I think. You can get them at Canadian Tire and garden centers. I believe the brand,
so they're readily available.
Pro Mix, yes.
Pro Mix. Okay, awesome. Thanks for that answer. Alicia comments, wonderful yard garden, and would like to know, how do you remove your lawn and what species did you use in your garden?
Oh boy. Nana?
Yes, removing a lawn, just dig it out with a shovel.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and species that I have in the garden, I have goldenrods, asters. I have the and the shorter one in front, and then the middle part gets the middle-sized plants, and then the taller one, such as fireweed, a giant hyssop, and sunflowers are at the back of the garden. So many different species: asters, goldenrods, three-flowered avens, prairie crocus, arnica, and monarda, or wild bergamot bee balm, and giant hyssop are the main ones. And there are a few other ones like chickweeds, pussy toes, and
Kind of like me, I have one of everything.
yeah, and blue-eyed grass. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So you did it all with a shovel. Like, would you recommend using a rototiller or something else, or do you think by hand is the best?
I did not use any of those. I just used the shovel.
You might, if you have a big area, you can use a sod cutter, but if you rototill just the grass, you'll have roots and vegetation coming back up. Some people put a tarp or cover on for a season, and that'll do it too.
Okay, that's good to know for those who don't want to go at it with the shovel.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Shirley says, can you talk a bit about using plugs rather than seeds taken from a pasture or native grassland? How can we ensure we don't damage roots? Do some species survive a plug transplanting better than others?
Well, plugs are usually from the garden center. I put my plants in minimum 2-inch pots, and I have done some plugs. Yeah, taken from a pasture. How do you not damage the roots? Well, you have you just tap them out. I grow them to the point where if you take them out of the pot, the roots are visible. If they're not visible and the soil falls apart, then they're probably not ready.
Okay, that is good to know. So wait until the roots are visible and then tap them out. Okay, yeah, perfect. Our next question, Brianna is wondering if you test the viability of wild harvested seeds.
We've debated a lot about that. And from our experience, if they germinate, they germinate. Yeah, we don't test the viability. And for our purposes, we're not relying on a customer that needs the plants. We do sell them, but if they germinate, they germinate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Seed. You went to the seed workshop, but
yeah, the viability test. Sometimes we do it personally, but not in a big scale. Like you can put them in a paper towel and put them in the fridge and see if they germinate. But if what we do when we start stratifying, for example, as Liz mentioned in the presentation, we mix the seeds, so they are not coming from one location. And when we mix it, there is a more possibility of at least a few of them germinate, even if they have different viability, or some of them they might not be good seeds, but some of them they are. So that's how we do it.
Okay, thanks for that answer. I think wild harvesting is a good social distancing activity for COVID right now, for anyone who's interested in, getting outside and being safe. So yeah, it's good to know how that process works. Joshua Perlman is wondering the radius from the intended planting, what would you consider local? And I also had that question too.
What was it, 30 miles or something?
Yeah, what I think is when you think about locally sourced, whatever is available, because as I mentioned, there are not very many places that you can actually get the seeds. But the closer you can get the seeds from the site that you want to plant is the best way. But local, if you have you have, for example, your neighbor has some native plants that, you know, they are originally there and they have been there and they have never cultivated or disturbed that land, just get them from your neighbor. But if they are not available, just go to the closest area that you can and get the seeds from there.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
In Alberta, there's a few suppliers, so we're good for the Edmonton area, and there's some suppliers around Calgary, but I don't know about the other ones.
Okay. Hannah is wondering what kind of volunteer opportunities the Native Plant Society offers.
Oh
Is
my.
that in your scope, or can you speak about that? If not, that's okay.
Volunteer at our demonstration beds. I do John Johnson Nature Center Tuesday nights. You can volunteer at Bunchberry Meadows, where we have those beds going in. I have a bed, and there's some other beds going there. You can volunteer seed cleaning. We usually have CDTs, where we drink tea and clean seeds, but not with COVID. Manor?
Yeah,
Prairies.
the sales and
Oh yeah, you
yes,
can sell seeds at the sales and man our little booth. You can help Manna at the Prairies or Patsy Cotterill at the Prairies.
if you're good at delivering presentations, you can deliver presentation on the importance of native plants.
We have monthly presentations that we're offering now on. Yeah, some of us are older and we need technical help. We have the newsletter that gets produced, and it's endless. We
sounds like there's lots of opportunities then.
If you just Google Edmonton Native Plant Society, and it comes up, I think, Edmonton Native Plant Group. There's an email address, and that will go to us, and we will send out the leaders of the different programs. Yep.
Okay, perfect. That's awesome. So Kelly is wondering, what is the best way to determine which plants will be most successful in your own yard?
Well, we have them in our various sources listed under plants for sun, semi-shade, shade, plants for pollinators. I'm working on developing bench cards, which are like the nursery bench cards, which give you the conditions needed, where they grow, whether they need water or whatnot. And also on our website, we have a list, a common name index list, and it lists the plants there and some of their requirements. And yeah, otherwise you can email us again at the society, and we can send you our lists. We have lists of many plants that would work for you.
Awesome. That's good to know. Diana says that she noticed there was mulch in your dry native garden. How do you apply mulch properly so that it doesn't restrict your plant growth in the spring?
Yes. When we plant, we put a very thin layer of mulch, but we leave a little bowl around the plant where there's less mulch. And, you know, you get to know how much you put on. And in that bed, it's not very thick. If you don't want the plants to spread greatly, then you can thicken the mulch up. But you just need a little bit just to start off with.
Okay. Okay, great. And it looks like there's been quite a bit of conversation going on in the chat box down there, which is awesome that people are.
Heck, but yeah.
I just got to notice 24 unread messages.
Oh my, okay.
Stephen Tanis has mentioned that salvaging from a location that is being removed is great. Ditches before the spraying, taking out of natural areas can introduce weeds. Look for areas that will be destroyed, and bigger roots the better. And I believe Steve had also mentioned To kill lawns, you have options of Roundup tarp, solarization, or sod stripping and removal. Any live root left will ruin the planting. So that's good to know. We've got quite a few experts in here that are helping to answer questions. So
Well, that's what we need, experts.
yeah, and Gail's answered a few more questions too. So yeah, I think that's all the time that we've got for today, but we've got a lovely comment from Gail. She says, wonderful talk, Liz and Manna. She misses you guys. I know you have a connection through the Native Plant Society. So I just want to thank you both again for the awesome detailed presentation. I know I took really good notes about the stratification. Something I'll be doing this spring, that's for sure.
It works. There's a book by June Flanagan on native plants.
Okay.
And that's where I got the cold moist stratification from.
Okay. Awesome. That is good to know. To all of our listeners there, Liz and Manna, as well as Gail, will be at a discussion group at 11:30 on Feed Loop. So you can head over there to check out and talk more about native plants and gardening. I'd also like to mention that Kayla Balderson-Burak from NCC and Lois Miller from Trace Associates will be doing a discussion group about how to stay connected during a pandemic, as well as the open discussion group room. And I do want to mention again, John Paul Wasson has an awesome poster about native plant gardening, and anyone interested in the poster session, be sure to check it out. They'll be there 11:30, 12:30 today to answer any questions. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your morning. And we'll see you in the discussion groups.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. See you.